Focus.
I don't know if I've mentioned it on this channel before. I probably have, but The World Ends With You is one of my favorite video games of all time. It really is. It is something I would call close to a perfect game in a lot of ways. And it's funny because the game isn't necessarily very perfect. There's a lot of issues with that game, and I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of hard to replay sometimes. But those problems, I guess you could say, the experimentalness of it and everything made that game nearly perfect. And it's one of the coolest examples of a game ever, like just in so many ways. And recently today they announced a sequel, kind of. It's called NEO The World Ends With You. There's not a lot of details about this, so I'm not going to go into detail on why what they're doing specifically with this game is not my thing. But if it isn't obvious from the title, this is not my thing. I don't know how to word this, but basically, if you asked me any point in me liking The World Ends With You right after I beat it, after mulling it over for a long time, after my friends played it, never a thought in my brain ever surfaced thinking, this needs a sequel. Because it's so just doesn't. It really, really doesn't need a sequel. And I think that is something that is really cool about that game. And it's something very potent about why that game is so good and why I like it so much. Almost revolves around the idea that making a sequel for it, I hate to say this, is inherently kind of a bad idea. And I'm going to talk about that. So I'm going to talk about why the original is so good and why I think personally it just hits you like a truck, man. So it really, I don't know. Sorry, I'm trying to get comfortable at the same time because I'm going to probably be here for a little bit. Really what I want to say though is that the original game is kind of meant to be a standalone game. It really doesn't have a lot there to have expanded universe stuff. Everything is kind of vague. Everything is sort of supposed to be interpreted, and everything is supposed to be it's kind of ambiguous, even down to the setting. People keep saying that this game will they wanted a sequel that takes place in the same world. Well, what is the world of The World Ends With You? It's just like real life. It's supposed to be, at least. It's obviously has like magic and stuff, but it's supposed to be a reflection of real life. You have actual real life Shibuya. It's not just like a made up place. And sure, it doesn't look exactly like Shibuya, but it's supposed to represent Shibuya. It's supposed to represent the actual real life place of Shibuya. It's not like, and there is lore to the world, but it's very, very ambiguous and vague. It's not really specifically stated where these things come from, where these ideas come from. It's all kind of supposed to be there to tell its story. It's a catalyst to tell its story. So a lot of people, when I was talking about a sequel and how I wasn't really into the idea of them announcing a sequel, a lot of people said I would want a game taking place in the same world. And I don't know, to that, I'm always like, what? At that point, what's the point? I'll get into this a little bit more a little bit later, but part of me is like, the world has nothing to do with the story of The World Ends With You. It's about the themes and the characters, especially those two things, the themes and the characters and how they intertwine and how it intertwines to the setting and the gameplay, and even the music and the aesthetics is just amazing. It's just so amazing. So in my head, that game is so conclusive. Everything is so wrapped tightly in like a nice little bow in that game. Everything, the gameplay, everything, the gameplay and the music, whatever, everything. I'm totally talking like nonsense sometimes. So I apologize if this is very rambly, by the way. Basically, everything is just very tightly put together. Nothing feels out of place in that game, which is so rare, I feel, with the games, especially games by big companies, because I think there's always an idea that things will be a franchise. So you kind of have to leave stuff open. You never want to just make something so tight knit that it has no way to make more of it. And that was an issue that I had with Kingdom Hearts. The original Kingdom Hearts game, I think, is a really cool game with a lot of nice story elements that tie together really well and have this nice conclusive ending, but it kept itself open. And then the sequels were so dependent on the future of that series. You can't play Kingdom Hearts. Maybe Kingdom Hearts 2. Even with Kingdom Hearts 2, you cannot play that game without understanding Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days and Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories to really understand that entire game scope, which is a little unfortunate. That's kind of a lot, and it sort of isn't that great. I'm sure a lot of people can tell you that the story in Kingdom Hearts gets a little muddy and gets a little messy, and that's because there's a little too much going on, in my opinion. I think there's just a little too much to Kingdom Hearts, and I don't think anybody can argue that. If you like the story of Kingdom Hearts, by all means, I think there is something there to like, but it's a little much. It's a little much. And there's a reason why it's such like a joke online with how much there is. And I don't want that for The World Ends With You, because I really did respect the original game's tightly knit story to just stay that way. But obviously, everyone in the world wanted a sequel. That was always what was being said. Everyone ever wanted a sequel. Every time anything The World Ends With You was brought up, the idea of a sequel was always brought up. And I never understood that, because I never felt like I wanted a sequel. Not that I was like actively thinking against it, but it was just like, it was done. It was done. I had nothing else I needed. A lot of people kept saying like, finally, like I can finally get this satisfaction of having a sequel or something. What was so dissatisfying about the first game? Like I'm always surprised when people want sequels, because not to judge anything, especially if you're excited. This is not meant, I meant to say this in the beginning, this is not meant to dissuade anybody's opinion about this game. If you're excited about this sequel, by all means be excited about it. I can't say I am. I'll talk about what I actually saw in the trailer in a second, but I'm not super excited for it, and mainly because I've been mulling this over for so many years on people talking about how they really want a sequel, and I always thought, do I actually want a sequel to this game? Like, if they make a sequel to this game, is this something that I will enjoy like the first game, or will it just be forced? And that is kind of what I'm getting at, like with a lot of this, is it doesn't feel natural. It feels like it's just being done because it needs to be done, or it should be done financially, or the fans asked for it, so give it to them, I guess. I still, again, anyway, I got off track. I don't really fully understand what people want in a sequel. Like whenever I asked somebody about this, there was always a lot of like confusion, and there was more talking about it like, oh, what would I want from a sequel? Well, yeah, I guess you're right about like the character stories ended. I'm like, why have you not thought about this? You just want A World Ends With You too? I get like, yeah, having more of the thing you like is cool or whatever. Play it on hard mode. I don't know. Like the part of me is like, it sounds like people just want it to just want it. And whenever I talk about this stuff, because I'm not going to go into detail on why story wise, I'm going to go a little bit, but I'm not going to go into why story wise it won't work. But whenever I do explain that to somebody who's played the original Kingdom Hearts, no, I don't want to start getting them confused. World Ends With You. People will usually be like, huh, like, yeah, I guess I never thought of it that way. And I'm like, what? Like, then what are you thinking? Like, I'm not kidding. Like, if you're not thinking of it in a way where it's like, how would the sequel work? You just want the sequel? I'm confused. It doesn't really make much sense to me. I heard some really good comparisons to it, but basically, The World Ends With You, as I was saying, the original, is so integral to its themes and everything, and its characters and their character arcs, that when it ends, there's not much else to say. You've explained why The World Ends With You, why the title is called that. You've explained why the characters learned these valuable lessons. You've explained why the thing that they're going through happened, why that person who is in charge is doing it, and even gave that person in charge, spoilers, they actually defeated him and changed him a little bit and like made him learn his lesson, kind of. Just in a lot of words, basically, the game was concluded. The story was concluded. Almost everything. And like I was saying before, it left nothing. It left me I didn't need anything more. I was so satisfied. There was nothing I needed more. And it wasn't like I was digging for this stuff. This wasn't stuff where I had to read all the item descriptions and read all the diary logs to figure this stuff out. There are additional things you get from reading, what are they called? They're like data logs kind of in the game. I don't remember what they're called, but you get additional stuff from that. But I didn't really do that. I got a very satisfying game with almost just not even I didn't even want to know anything else really, just by playing the game. And I played it when I was again, I'm not trying to put anyone down. I apologize if it sounds like that. I played this when I was 16. Like, I'm not like a galaxy brain, god brain maniac when it comes to video games. And I don't think I'm acting like I am either. I don't want to act like I am. I just genuinely don't feel like I am. But I played this when I was 16 and I understood exactly what was happening in the game. And it was vague, but it was never vague to a point where it was like pretentious or like confusing. It just had its story and it told it and it was great. And honestly, at the time, I wasn't exactly like the edgy teenager I think the game was meant for. But it's interesting because the style, the music, the character art, everything really invokes this idea of that kind of, for lack of better terms, like that sort of like emo aesthetic of like the mid 2000s that I think a lot of people were really into at the time. But The World Ends With You is such a great idea because so many pieces of media that had that aesthetic back then were encouraging kids and adolescent to be like, everyone fucking hates you. Like everyone hates you. Everyone's against you. You know, like punk is anti-society, anti-everything. You don't want to be. I guess that's very, very, very layman's version of what like punk was. But you know what I mean. Everything was trying to teach kids that like the world is against you. But this game was the opposite. This game was ease you in with these aesthetics that might teach you something like this, like the edgy kind of teen sort of stuff, but it teaches you to like broaden your life and like seek happiness and like not be an insulated like crybaby. Like it wanted you to feel that and it knew its audience, which is so funny to me because part of me thinks some of the audience that again, if you're excited about the remake or the new game, that's not the problem here. It's people who might not understand my point. There's been a lot of people who immediately say I'm gatekeeping or I don't want a sequel because people like, you know, don't want people to be happy or something stupid, some elitist thing. It's really not that. And I think it's funny because I think people like that might not really understand where I'm coming from because possibly maybe they didn't really understand the game fully, which is sad because a lot of people get into it because of the character designs and a lot of people love the characters and love the character designs, I guess. But it's funny because the characters are so much more than they come out to be. They look one way but act very, very different on purpose because they want to play with your expectations in that game and they want to teach you something. And it does an amazing job at that, as I've probably reinstated about 400,000 fucking times in this video so far. But it really does that so beautifully. And I'm just gushing about The World Ends With You at this point. But the point is, I think a sequel would only really be able to do the same thing, you know? It's like, yeah, you can add new characters, which they're doing, and you can tell new stories. But if it's The World Ends With You, that title, that idea, the Reaper's game, the gameplay, the music, all this stuff, all the aesthetics, everything, really it all comes together. So what will it all have a purpose in the sequel? Like, is it going to have a different purpose? Is it going to retool them to tell me something different? I find that hard to believe because it all felt so homogenous. It's like you can't get, this sounds so stupid, you can't get like 4 adding like 2 and 3, you know? It's like you have to that's a stupid example, but point is, it's like so mathematically put together. I was trying to think of a math problem to go with it to be cool and awesome YouTube guy that people could quote, but I don't think I did it right. The point is, it's also perfectly put together that it's like, okay, but can you do that again with the same thing? Like, if we're using some of the assets and some of the aesthetics, what are you going to tell that could give me a different feeling, but the same like idea? Because then it's like, oh, well, what if they tell the same theme? It's like, what the fuck's the point? I'm not gonna lie, I'm in the boat where if you're gonna do the same exact fucking thing again, why don't you just, there's so many better ways to do that. There's so many more clever ways to do that. There's so many ways that you can be like, make a new game with a new cast of whole different situation, but still tell the same story and have a title that's completely different. But then you're like, oh my God, it's just like The World Ends With You. And that's like, that's pretty cool. Or, you know, if you made a spiritual successor, maybe you tell a different story. Maybe you tell a whole different slew of stuff. You tell this whole different thing and you call it something different. It's like a spiritual successor to The World Ends With You. Why does it have to be Neo The World Ends With You? What does that mean? And it might blow my mind. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised and it'll do something where I'm like, oh my God, I never thought of that. But there's no scenario in my head where it wouldn't feel like it's cashing in on a franchise name or it's rehashing what's already been done. It's not like other reboots or something. I feel like this is so different because this story is so integral to everything about the original. And even down to the title. Really, the title is something that really kind of gets under my skin because the title had such a great moment and such a like realization that the title of the game had this whole plan to it. It's such an interesting idea. And while I think the theme of the game is The World Ends With You, that is basically the thesis of the game, you could tell that again. You could make a game with that thesis again, and you could possibly make it different, but I just feel like it won't be as effective because they're gonna have to change things. And something Nomura said on his Twitter when he posted about the sequel is it's a sequel to the anime, he said, which it might just be he's trying to advertise the anime, or it could be a translation error or something. But he said it's a sequel to the anime, which makes me a little concerned that they might change the story of the original in the anime to make it more in line with the sequel. And they already did that, by the way. If you didn't know, the Switch version has an extended epilogue, which they added to the game, which just shoehorns in a new character randomly and just like extends the universe. Like not even extends actually, I can't even say extends the universe, just extends the story. Just basically like makes the story go on for no apparent reason besides this is sequel fodder. And they even call the girl didn't have a name. They even called her Hype Chan. Oh God. Oh. I wasn't happy about that prequel or that epilogue thing. I wasn't happy about the epilogue thing in the Switch version because it felt like it was disrespecting what the original tried so hard to do. And that's kind of where I come from with why I don't really like the idea of the sequel. Is I think the original does all these things so well, and as I've been stating this entire video, it's trying so hard and it does it so beautifully. Everything, every piece of that game, the art, the music, the aesthetics, the gameplay, the setting, everything was so intricately made to be this for this game. And it felt like a love, like just this passion project between everything, no franchise attached. And that was part of it. I like the idea that it was almost like anti-capitalism in a way, which I'm only saying that because there's a funny line in the game talking about that, but it felt like kind of the antithesis of something like Final Fantasy that just kept making games that were so disconnected, didn't really have any reason to be connected, but there was a franchise there and they had similar themes or maybe similar like ideas. But it just felt like it was so unneeded. And whenever Square did make an original IP like Chrono Trigger, it was awesome and people loved it. And it had this really nice singularity to it. I know there's a sequel to Chrono Trigger, but people don't really talk about that one, so I don't know. The World Ends With You, I felt like was a great example of a company that didn't need to stick to the generic franchise IP thing. It could do a single game by itself and do it super well, and I respect it so hard for that. And now it's gone because it isn't that anymore. And the original still stands on its own, but making a sequel means that they are prioritizing the game being a franchise, the game being a series, the game having this more extended story because people want it for some reason. And like I said, if you want it, that's fine. If you wanted more of The World Ends With You, that's fine and dandy, and I think that's great. But I'd respect the idea that my opinion about this also is valid in some ways. Like, I think it's fair to say that maybe these things that I cherish so much about The World Ends With You won't be in that sequel, so it doesn't really get me excited for it. And if they are in that sequel, they'll feel forced, like I said. And unless it can really surprise me, which in just so many ways I can't think of it surprising me. Not that it won't surprise me, but like it won't be what I want, question mark, which sounds spoiled, but it's hard to explain. I hope I'm getting my point across well here, that it's not about people being excited for it. It's more just about what I valued in The World Ends With You and how that kind of won't happen in a sequel. Also, I'm just gonna say, so actually let's talk a little bit about what the actual sequel seems to be. For one thing I love about The World Ends With You is it is a great example of using the hardware. It uses everything the DS had. It shoved everything. That game is such a great DS game. It's a good game, but it's also a really good DS game. It uses every bit of the DS's hardware. It's really cool. Really, really cool. Love that about it. It's not going to happen because you can't really use the exclusive powers of the Switch because it's also on PS4. So you can't really use the exclusive powers of the PS4 because it's also on Switch. You can't even use the graphical powers of the PS4 because it's also on Switch, which just feels like it's being weighed down by it. And then also it's like, what's it called? The game, I don't know. The DS game had a really cool combat system, really confusing and a little convoluted sometimes. But once you learn it and you can really get good at it, it is super rewarding. And it is an awesome combat system. And they implement it so well into that game. And again, it ties into the story even. It's really cool. This game just looks like another action RPG. Not that that's bad, but man, there's so many of these days. And I really was hoping I could scour something in this trailer looking unique. And while, yeah, there's like team attack things, and it seems like there's might be an emphasis on using your team, and there's like a sync meter. There are games that have done that before. Like, not that it needs to be this like unbelievable, unique thing, but like, it just didn't really feel like it was doing anything super unique. But when you see The World Ends With You's combat, you really think there's nothing else like this. Like, there's seriously nothing else like this, and there never was before, and there never was after. And this one, people are like, kind of looks like Xenoblade, kind of looks like Kingdom Hearts, kind of got these vibes from it. It's like, I know it'll be way more, what do you call it? Way more digestible for people when it's a familiar, combat system. I do hope it keeps a lot of the aspects of the original games, like story and stuff, but without some of that stuff, like the DS screen and the characters and their story arcs, The World Ends With You really isn't The World Ends With You. So if you're going to make a second version, or NEO World Ends With You, I find it hard to believe you'll actually earn that name, in my opinion, which, again, sounds a little pretentious, but it's just kind of how I'm feeling about this. I've always felt this way about the potential of a sequel. I kind of didn't like how they just kept like milking it too. They kept making these like ports to everything and kept like teasing like animes, and Anime Expo, they had a thing and everything. And I was just kind of like, guys, just let it go. Like, just let the game exist as it is. Re-releasing it is one thing, but adding the epilogue story and like apparently gonna be maybe changing the narrative of the anime, like, it feels a little disrespectful to the original creators. I don't know if the original creators are still the ones working on it. I don't know if they're being pushed by Square. I don't know what the point of it is, or maybe they're just like okay with this, and that's totally fine too. But part of me is like, this feels like it might sully some of the cool shit in the original. I don't know, things I really liked about the original. That's basically where I stand with this. It's interesting because it is mostly a positive thing. I very, very, very rarely see people complaining about it. And not that I'm complaining about it. I just didn't really think it would be a thing that would be worth making. And now that it's here, I think a lot of people will just immediately be like, this is only a good thing. And it's like, well, what about the things that the original had that this sequel will kind of just shit on a little bit? Ever think of that? And everyone's like, no. But I guess those things that are more, people value certain things in video games. Everyone's got a unique experience. So things in The World Ends With You, maybe it left you wanting a sequel. I don't know how. I personally cannot understand how. And maybe even the idea that it's like, oh, if a sequel got announced, I would love that. I just never felt like that was a thing for me. I guess I was too distracted by the idea that it would possibly ruin things that I loved about the original. And by the way, ruining things about the original is not a great way to word this. I just don't really want to know it as a franchise. I liked the idea of knowing it as a single video game that stood on its own and was this nice little piece of media that I could, like, you know, interest people without having to tell them, oh, there's sequels that you should or shouldn't play, or there's extended stories within the Switch version specifically, or if you watch the anime, you get a different story, and there's, like, I don't need that. That's like Kingdom Hearts. Like, I don't want this to turn into Kingdom Hearts. And I think anybody, if I said that to everyone's like, oh shit, like, oh yeah, wait, I don't want this to turn. Any World Ends With You fan will be like, well, what if this turns into Kingdom Hearts? And they're like, oh wait, fuck, no. I'm kidding mainly, but yeah, I'm cautiously interested in the game as it stands as a video game. I want to be surprised, as I've said a few times in this video. I do want to be surprised, but you know, I also am going to stand by my statements that I think the original works best by itself, and I don't think it needs a sequel. And I think a sequel being made feels more corporate than anything. Feels more like, oh well, the fans will buy this shit, and it's like, great. Like, what else are you gonna do with a popular franchise? The World Ends With You is pretty popular, all things considered. So what else are you gonna do with a popular franchise? Just let it sit there? Like, what? No, you gotta make money, man. But yeah. But that's about it. I hope people are excited. I hope you can understand my opinion on this stuff. I hope you can maybe relate a little bit. That'd be nice. It's a little annoying feeling so alone. But hopefully you can at least see where I'm coming from. I don't mean to damper on anybody's excitement for this game. If you're excited for it, that's awesome. There's probably a lot to be excited about that maybe I'm just not seeing. Maybe I just can't really see with just how routed my brain is in this at this point. But yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed my my ramblings about this video game that I really like. Yeah, so see you guys in whatever video I decide to make after this at some point.